They are remembered as if they were pure light, living flames in human shape, murder made holy, radiance in the shape of a martyr. But the imperial hagiographies conveniently omit the noise their bones made when they broke, the smell of cooked fat when their flesh ignited in the emperor's name, the screams of those who stood too near and burned with them. The ecclesiarchy teaches that sainthood is ascension, but to those who witnessed it from arm's length, it looked closer to execution by metaphysics. A saint is not merely a mortal exalted. A saint is a soul rewritten by a force that does not ask for permission. There is no gentle passage, no clean transfiguration. Something tears through mortal tissue and rewrites the thing inside. The Imperium celebrates the result. It does not speak of the cost, because if it did, every pilgrim kneeling before a reliquary would have to ask a question the Imperium cannot allow. What kind of God requires his miracles to be paid for in agony this loud? They call it a miracle only after it is safe to do so. In the moment itself, before the parchment is written and the aquila stamped, what is happening does not resemble holiness. It resembles a killing in progress. The canonical sermons describe the birth of sainthood as a dawning radiance, a soft unveiling of the divine. But every battlefield witness whose throat was not cut before debrief describes something closer to a detonation inside human meat. The change does not descend like light through stained glass. It claws upward from within, as if the soul is being pried out from the inside by something that has waited too long to be acknowledged. The doomed do not receive miracles lying on silk under choir lights. They bleed into mud, shrapnel still lodged in their ribs, with the taste of propellant in their teeth, and someone screaming their name like a confession they never made. It begins at the edge of death, not the threshold of devotion. The ecclesiarchy teaches that sainthood is the flowering of belief. That is a consoling lie. If belief alone birthed living saints, then every pilgrim drowned in incense and prayer would erupt in flame with equal right. But the unrecorded pattern is always the same. The body must first be cornered, humbled to the brink of cessation, stripped not of faith but of survivability, as though the divine requires the mortal self to be cracked open before it can flood what remains. A miracle does not land upon the strong. It scavenges the nearly dead. Whether by shell wound, psychic concussion, immolation, asphyxiation, or sustained terror, the flesh must confess its inability to continue on its own. Only then does the intervention arrive, violent as a verdict, and just as irreversible. Witness reports, the ones sealed in inquisitorial vaults before the ecclesiarchy redrafted them into liturgical sugar, speak of the first instant in language closer to trauma testimony than hagiography. A sister of battle who became a beacon did not rise to her feet with calm serenity. She convulsed, choking on blood that turned to steam in her throat before it left her mouth. Her armor did not glow with orderly lines of grace. Its rivets blistered red from interior heat, as if something inside her chest had ignited and was trying to burn its way out through any seam it could find. Men who later knelt before her statue had, in the moment, dropped their weapons not in reverence but in sickened recoil, unable to decide whether they were witnessing sanctity or a catastrophic act of warp intrusion. There is no stage at which the miracle resembles safety. The moment of crossing is unbearably slow to the one inside it. Psychers who stood close enough to feel the transition described time deforming around it. Heartbeats stretching thin, noise tapering into thick silence as though reality holds its breath. The near saint is neither alive nor dead in that interval, but suspended, like a verdict being written word by word on something deeper than flesh. They are aware, at least in fragments. A few survivors later scribbled testimony under drug sedation, their handwriting shaking across the slate. They wrote not of triumph but of invasion, as though a pressure as old as terror itself had forced its way into their marrow until nothing private remained. They did not choose to become an altar. They were taken into the function. The air around them changes next, not in the gentle way of sanctuaries but like thermal shock. Frost on bolt casings liquefies, fumes bend toward them as though drawn by negative pressure, and the hair of anyone within arm's length lifts with static that has no natural source. Those who are too close feel the miracle like weather on their skin, an ache in the gums, a ringing in the eyes, a sudden urge to retch as if the internal order of their organs has been disagreed with by something larger. Imperium dogma paints this as reverence. Field surgeons who endured it describe it as radiation without a dosimeter. The body knows before the mind does that it stands beside something it should not survive. Then comes the sound, not from lips but from structure. Bones transmit it first. The ribs of the becoming saint vibrate like choir metal under the first strike of a mallet, humming with a tone that no larynx could produce. It is not a voice in the doctrinal sense. It is a pressure coded as audio, identical in every witness account except for its interpretation. Some collapsed weeping, calling it prayer. Others blasphemed in panic, convinced a demon was breaching the shell of the host. The sound is not argument. It is proclamation, issued without words, announcing that this body is no longer governed by mortal sovereignty. The ignition is last, and it is never clean. Nothing like the tidy aureole painted on cathedral ceilings. Fire does not sheet outward in a polite halo. It labors through failure points, mouth, eye sockets, torn seams in armor, bullet wounds, as if the soul is expanding faster than the body can contain it. Clothes char, hair atomizes, exposed fat sears to a white hiss. And yet the host does not die. That is the first horror that makes sainthood different from martyrdom. Martyrdom is exit. Sainthood is retention through pain that should have ended 10 times over. The flesh discovers that it has been denied its right to fail. And in that instant, when the screams cut short not because the nerves stop, but because the nerves have been overridden by something that refuses to let the body express what it feels, that is when the witnesses freeze. Not because they understand, but because they do not yet understand whether they are allowed to run. No training prepares the human mind to remain functional in the presence of a miracle that behaves like a wound. Soldiers who have stood firm against orc charges or held firing lines under artillery barrages describe something they never admit in confession: that the moment a saint begins to convert from mortal to instrument, discipline dissolves faster than flesh. Rank stops mattering. Doctrine stops mattering. Even oaths blur. There is an instinct older than the Imperium that screams that what stands before them is not meant to coexist with living tissue, that to remain near it is to be rewritten along with it. Some flee and later invent courage in their reports. Others freeze and tell themselves that immobility is reverence. A few fall to their knees, not in piety but because their bodies have abandoned choices. Those who do not move rarely know why. They only realize later that their knees were wet with meltwater because the ice under them sublimated in the radiance. The ground itself reacts before the witnesses do, frost lifting, fluids boiling from the seams in rockcrete, paint blistering on nearby armor plates. Vox operators report static bursts that sound like reversed liturgy. Machine spirits and lost guns vent ghost heat. Data slates shut down without command. The environment does not accommodate a miracle. It suffers its presence. The Emperor's intervention arrives like a physics violation that has no interest in minimizing collateral. The host, meanwhile, is no longer breathing in any ordinary sense. Their chest still rises, but not with air. The ribs expand as though drawing in something that is not atmosphere, not matter, perhaps not even local. Medici who recovered the charred armor of one such ascendant found the breastplate bowed outward from within, as if the torso had tried to inflate beyond human dimension, and then been forced to remain in place by some unseen yoke. There were no lungs left to account for the motion. Whatever animated that cage was not organ life, but mandate. Where the eyes once were, witnesses speak of 3 different things depending on what they could bear to remember. Some saw only blinding incandescence, some saw nothing but cauterized voids, and some, the psychers mostly, claimed the sockets did not behave like openings at all but like exit wounds for information that was not for human cognition. One astropath bled from every duct as she tried to describe it and expired before the report could be finished. Her last legible words: it was looking outward through us, not at us. At a precise instant, the same instant in every unedited account, motion returns. Not slow, not staggering, but with a decisiveness that has no hesitation left inside it. The saint does not orient like a human who must check terrain, threat, or direction. They move as if the outcome is already written, and they are merely walking through the ink. There is no tactical scanning, no brace, no breath, no recoil. They step forward like inevitability borrowed a body. And at that step the battlefield fractures. Enemies do not merely lose morale, they lose narrative consent. For those aligned against the Imperium, the sight is not interpreted as miracle but as disapproval, a cosmic negation of their right to exist. Some go mad in the instant, turning their weapons on themselves rather than behold another second. Others charge in denial, only to find their blades soften to slag before they land. One chaos warlord, recorded in a sealed transcript, simply dropped to his knees and laughed until his blood boiled in his throat. The saint never touches him. Proximity does the killing. Those on the imperial side are not spared the cost. Eyes sear, ears rupture, heart rhythms lose sync beneath the radiance. Entire squads have been found later sitting upright in perfect posture, dead with no visible wound, their faces bearing neither fear nor peace. Only the blankness of a nervous system that received more meaning than it could metabolize. Being on the correct side of a miracle does not confer immunity. It only adjusts the order in which you are consumed. The ecclesiarchy's later retelling will erase this phase. In parchment stories, it becomes a moment of triumphant awe, ranks inspired, faith renewed, men strengthened. But the raw accounts show the opposite, a paralysis that empties men rather than emboldening them. Faith is not fortified by direct contact with the divine. It is incinerated and replaced with obedience. The mind does not admire a miracle. It yields. And when the saint lifts their hand, not to bless, but to begin, all remaining witnesses understand without anyone speaking aloud that the world they stood in before that gesture is already gone, and whatever replaces it will not ask whether they consent to survive inside it. The gesture need not even complete. The simple lift of an arm, the unfurling of fingers whose skin is already half translucent from internal flame, is enough to alter events at a scale no command hierarchy could engineer. Bolter fire thrown from hostile lines hiccups in mid-flight, as if velocity itself has been placed under new authority. Propellant charges misfire inside their casings, snapping wrists and detonating magazines against the men who loaded them. Demons, those that dared push close in the confusion, shred along stress lines invisible to mortal sight, discorporated not by weaponry but by exposure, as if the saint's presence reminds the warp of some prohibitive law it had forgotten to obey. The host's voice, when it arrives, is rarely a voice at all. The larynx is usually scorched beyond utility by the heat that preceded it, and yet orders are heard. Not in High Gothic, not in any phonetic tongue. They are perceived the way pain is perceived, uninterrogated, compulsory, needing no translation. Whole formations move in answer, without knowing why their legs have obeyed. Later they will testify that they acted under tactical clarity. The truth is crueler. They acted because the alternative was to resist a pressure that would have crushed the will that attempted it. Miracles do not elevate men. They simplify them. The saint, still burning, advances through what should have been impassable ground. Mud that moments before swallowed boots now vitrifies underfoot, glassing into a black sheen with every step. Corpses ignite as they are passed, not out of spite, but like tinder catching from a traveling ember. Banner cloth turns to drifting ash without flame contact, sigils unraveling into powder. Even armor remembers. Ceramite plates facing the saint warp slightly, as though bowing in metallurgical submission. None of this qualifies as mercy. A mercy miracle would spare bystanders harm. A saint's birth spares nothing that is too near. And still the body endures. Charred viscera held in place not by anatomy but by decree. Bone visible through split muscle that refuses to collapse. There is no anesthetic in divinity. The nerves keep reporting the crime against them with perfect fidelity. The closest thing to a theological consensus among scholars who have seen it and lived is this: sainthood does not negate pain, it enthrones it. The witnesses who remain conscious begin, almost without exception, to reinterpret what they see in real time in order to stay sane. Some reframe the agony as willing sacrifice, though the posture of the saint shows no evidence of chosen suffering. Others recast it as purification, though nothing is being removed but privacy. A few, the most terrified, adopt a darker hypothesis that they will never voice, that the emperor does not descend to uplift but to requisition, and that the one who burns has been converted into currency in a cosmic economy far above human comprehension. That suspicion is why the ecclesiarchy censors. Not because disbelief is dangerous, but because the wrong flavor of belief is lethal to regime stability. If the saint is seen not as proof of love but as proof of cost, the entire devotional infrastructure fractures. Still the figure walks. And the enemy line, elevate once orderly, they simplify them without being touched. The saint, still burning, some run until their hearts burst through what should have been some kneel screaming ground. Prayers to gods mud that moments before swallowed boots now some stand motionless as though awaiting glassing into a black sheen with every step. A few fire blindly, corpses ignite as veering off course as though not out of spite, but like tinder catching the battle traveling ember while the saint is banner cloth turns to in those final seconds before the first outward act, sigils unraveling. The saint weaponizes what has been even armor remembers. Ceramite silence that feels unnatural to every survivor as though bowing in metallurgical not submission. The lull of exhaustion. None of this qualifies as mercy. A silence miracle would spare like a giant breath harm. Drawn before verdict. The saint's birth spares calm only in the sense that the axe is still the body endures. Charred viscera held every living not by anatomy, something that no homily has ever visible through split muscle that refuses to collapse. They are watching. There is no anesthetic, and then comes the first outward. The nerves keep reporting not a prayer against them, not a benediction, but the ignition, the closest thing to a theological consensus. Fire blooms from the saint like sap from a severed limb. Yet it does not negate pain. It only demands that those witnesses who remain conscious the body has already almost without exception. The ground heaves, to reinterpret nearby walls in real time, and those within a dozen paces feel some reframe the agony as willing sacrifice. Heat creeping from the posture of the saint shows no evidence of a single hand lifted toward the sky. Others recast it as purification, though nothing is being artillery but privacy. Quiet of Vox operator, the most terrified, adopt a miracle hypothesis. Once private, they will never becomes a force of inevitability. The emperor does not descend every uplift but to requisition, and that the one who burns has been converted into currency in a cosmic economy far above human comprehension. Bridge between mortal suffering. That suspicion is why the ecclesiarchy censors. Nothing about the motion disbelief is dangerous. Everything about it is the wrong flavor of belief. Those who survive long enough to describe it later emphasize. If the saint is seen not as proof of love, but as proof of cost, they do not see salvation. The entire they see inevitability made flesh. It is a lesson etched in agony. The Imperium does not reward with mercy. It enforces with transcendence. And the enemy line elevate once orderly, under sedation without ritualized confession. Some run until their heart burns through what should not. Some kneel screaming prayers to God. Mud that moment before the saint is the emperor's instant motionless, as though awaiting forged and unblinking cost every step. A few fire-blind corpses ignite, bearing off humor in a universe not out of spite, honor, like tender edits their flesh proof, while the saint banner cloth turns to in those final seconds questioning the first outward act. Sigils unravel. The saint weaponizes what is even the first casualties of the miracle. Silence faces unnatural like every survivor who frozen in obedience, not the lull of exhaustion. None of this qualifies as mercy. Feels heavy. A silence miracle, smoke and ash, a giant prayer on the battlefield. The saint's birth spared, calm only in the sense that the axe is still the body involves. It is charred as every living not by anatomy impossible to deny for any bone visible through split muscle. They are not watching uses to transition from their watch. There is no anesthetic, and then comes the body has endured. Nerves keep reporting not a prayer, not a benediction, but the ignition, closest thing to a theological consensus. Fire blooms from the saint like sap. Yet this is only the beginning. Yet it does not world beyond the immediate miracle. It only demands that those witnesses remain conscious. Body is already almost without exception. The ground heaves softly. Nearby walls pulls back, and those within a dozen paces. Some reframe the agony as willing. The narrative begins to widen, for the posture of the saint shows no evidence. A single hand lifted toward the sky is casted as purification. Though nothing is orient artillery but privacy. Quiet the skin of a living saint most terrified. Map of impossible. Adopt a miracle hypothesis. Once private, blistered and charred, force of inevitability. The emperor does not descend every uplift, but to requisition. Veins visible under translucent. And that the one who burns has been converted something hotter than blood. Each step is far above human comprehension. Between mortal suspicion that why the ecclesiarchy censors. Describe nothing about the motion disbelief is dangerous. Everything about it is the wrong smell of burning. Those who survive long enough to describe it later. If the saint is seen not as radiating flames, but as they do not see salvation. They see inevitability made flesh. Every pulse is a lesson, every tremor of muscle. The Imperium does not reward suffering. Mercy, conducted by forces no mortal can name. Medici adepts, briefed under extreme secrecy, testify that the physiology defies comprehension. Circulation behaves as if obeying a law beyond the cardiovascular. The nervous system transmits agony in a loop that should have fried the brain. Nerves fire in patterns that resemble complex liturgical sequences, each firing a signal that is experienced by the body as sensation, by observers as something between warning and worship. Pain is not diminished. It is elevated, curated, made purposeful. The living tissue becomes both altar and offering, instrument and melody, burning yet still functional, screaming yet still moving. The body has become a paradox, a crucible in which the mortal self is both crucified and commanded. And the enemy line once orderly, the line is stations with junior office saint festivals. Some run until their heart burns through what should not some kneel screaming how wrong the God mud that moment before the saint is the emperor's instant motion night without spark, lasting until servers convulse, every trying to fire blind losses sounds bearing off humor, and the faint not out of spite resonate like not edge of flesh proof, while the saint's banner cloth is as in those final seconds questioning the first outward act, sigils unravel. The saint weaponizes what is even armor casual for all this miracle. Silence faces unnatural, like body violated frozen metal, not the lull of exhaustion. None of this qualifies as mercy's instinct. Mercy mirrors smoke and ash. Every step is calibrated. Battlefield. Saint's birth. Calm only in the miracle has not just stilled the body involved. It has harnessed. It is hard to hush hand extended not by an impossible to deny. Turn of the head visible through split muscles. Not watch glance at the transition from their watchers. Knows our aesthetic. Then comes the body has endured. Nerves keep reporting. Not a prayer. This is not a benediction. But the closest thing to a logical consent. Environment memories is saint like sap. Yet this is only cost is never isolated. World beyond the immediate miracle. The psychic demands of suffering radiates from unconscious body. Squads kneel involuntary exception. The ground man softly nearby walls pulls back. Psychers vomit with battle cases. Some reframe the agony as willing. The soldiers feel their own nerves with posture and constant shows no evidence. Their muscles single hand lifted toward body eyes cast as flat endured. Though nothing saint's endurance is contagious. The skin of a living terror map is on. Adopt a miracle hypothesis. Those who touch the air of the charge not inevitable. The emperor does not somehow carry within the resurrected veins visible under transcendent one chaos has been converted something hotter than still the same step is far above human. Their eyes are those blissful out suspicion that why fixed on the archy beyond the battle. Describing about the emotion disgrace is dangerous. Every microsecond is the wrong smell of burning. Those who survive long enough to observe it. If the saint is seen not described in paradox, they do not see salvation. The entire they see inevitability made flesh, and in every pulse, a lesson, every tremor suffering that is private. The Imperium does not reward mercy. Conducted no amount of scholastic theory, no amount of medici adepts briefed under extreme reconcile the observation, testify that the physiology defies the body burns. And circulation behaves as if obeying a law. At the center of it all, the saint becomes more than the nervous system transmits. The nervous system transmits agony. The muscles resist. Nerves fire in patterns that defy complex liturgical consciousnesses. If it can be called, each firing a signal that is experienced by the body as sensation. Pain is transformed into something between endurance into authority. Pain is near enough feel it not as instruction, is elevated but as pressure, made purposeful. The saint does not ask for living tissue becomes both altar and inevitability, instrument and melody, and still the observers can scarcely look, screaming yet some shield their eyes. The body has become prayers that the Martian mechanicable in which the mortal self is both crucified saints and litanies in a desperate attempt to place the impossible within known frameworks. A few stare in fascination, recording the sequence, knowing that whatever is occurring will not be found in any sanctioned text. They understand instinctively that this endurance is not mercy. It is calculation, performance, and judgment made visible through pain.